Today's reflection is from the Gospel attributed to Luke, the story of the persistent widow. Jesus told them a story showing that it was necessary for them to pray consistently and never quit. He said, "There once was a judge in some city who never gave God a thought and cared nothing for people. A widow in that city kept after him. 'My rights are being violated, protect me.' He never gave her the time of day. But after this went on, and on, and on, he said to himself, 'I care nothing for what God thinks, even less what people think. But because this widow won't quit badgering me, I'd better do something and see that she gets justice. Otherwise, I'm going to end up beaten black and blue by her pounding.'" I really don't like that parable. I confess. In all the readings, whoever's interpretation you're looking at, it does start off by saying, Jesus told the story to tell people how to pray constantly. Because without that little heading, what you hear is, if you pray long and hard enough, God is going to give you what you want. But if we look at Jesus' way of being in the world, in his way of prayer, we may be able to get another meaning from this, and that's why that little header is there, just to tell us we're supposed to be looking for another meaning. One clue that this was not the message Christ was trying to get at is the simple fact that this story starts with a judge who's an atheist. Now, in Jerusalem, if you were a judge, you were either a judge of the people through their religion, so you were a Jewish judge, therefore you were not an atheist. Or you were a judge of the Roman Empire who proclaimed the emperor as God, therefore you can't afford to proclaim you're an atheist, whether you are or not. So already there's a bit of absurdity as the story starts. Richard Rohr reminds us that, quote, Jesus' own style of teaching in stories, parables, and enigmatic sayings was undoubtedly learned in his own prayer practices. He clearly operated from a consciousness different from that of the masses, and even that of the religious leaders of the time, who largely fought him. Most seemed to misunderstand him, or even ignore him, despite what seemed to be astounding healings and miracles. I believe this parable is an example of just that. This misunderstanding can and has led to prosperity gospel, where if you pray for it, it will come, and if you don't get it, you did something wrong. Either you didn't pray hard enough, or you're guilty of being a sinner. Jesus seemed to know that he would be misunderstood. And he did not allow that to stop him, nor discourage him from proclaiming these radical little stories that would get twisted up. He even said, "For this people's sense," talking to the people today, "have become calloused, and they have become hard of hearing, and they shut their eyes so they won't see with their eyes or hear with their ears or understand with their minds. And they change their hearts nor will they change their hearts and lies that I may heal them." But Jesus also went on to say, "Happy are your eyes because they see. Happy are your ears because they hear." I want us to explore a little bit more about what Richard Rohr addresses here. Jesus himself seemed to prefer a prayer of quiet, something more than social, liturgical, or verbal prayer, which is only mentioned a few times. What we do here are frequent references such as, in the morning, long before dawn, he got up and left the house and went off to a lonely place to pray. Luke describes him as praying privately before almost all major events. There are the 40 days alone in the desert, and the choir sings. "Oh Lord, hear our prayer." Which means he must have missed the family-based Sabbath services and the public temple services. And of course, there is his final prayer alone in the Garden of Gethsemane. Richard Rohr points out that Jesus taught us, quote, "You should go to your private room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in that secret place." Which, again, is rather explicit and also intimately invitational, and especially because, if you think about it, most homes of his people would not have such a private room to go to. So they would have to seek a place, most likely outside of the city, for some quiet and solitude. Some people caught what Jesus was teaching and of the seeking a quiet place. This quiet, private space does not need to be physical. It can be spiritual. It can be done in group, much as it is done here today. Though we are in community, each prayer is personal, private, and quiet. Quote, "We need no wings to go in search of God, but have only to find a place where we can be alone and look upon his presence within us." These words were written by St. Teresa of Avila in her book, The Way of Perfection. Jesus says we should not seek prayer in public. Now, he did not condemn the concept of church or synagogue, but he did emphasize a different kind of prayer life. What of all these teachings of Jesus seems to say is that we probably need an unsaying prayer. The prayer of quiet or contemplative prayer or meditation to balance out and ground all spoken and verbal prayer. Many Christians seem to have little experience of prayer of quiet and tend to actually be afraid of it or even condemn it. And I'll tell you, when we were putting this service together, I wanted 5 minutes of silence between every song, and Bob was afraid that everybody would get up and run out for fear of the silence. So we cut it down to 3. Without this inner, secret, contemplative prayer life, a life of constant prayer, a conversation of love in God that is ongoing, our external, our communal prayer becomes nothing more than a meaningless show. Prayer, communal and silent, are practices that each supports the other. St. Teresa reminds us that, quote, "First we must be searching for God. If God is just a name, if God's love for us is an abstract truth which we believe but do not realize, we will hardly search for it. If, on the other hand, we are convinced that we truly believe that God is, in Teresa's words, a better prize than any earthly love, if we realize that we actually have within us something incomparable, more precious than anything we see outside, then we will desire to enter in within ourselves and to seek God in that quiet place. When we are convinced that God cares for us and waits for us, we will have that security and the courage to love God in return." This is what that odd parable is all about. It's not about bugging God to get what we seek, but it is about what we should be seeking, a relationship with God at all times. When the stern judge offers justice to the woman, she is getting what she sought. She is getting a relationship. When we turn inward and constantly seek God, we'll find God seeking us as well. Western culture has tended to be an extroverted culture and a can-do culture, and prayer too easily became an attempt to change God and aggrandize ourselves instead of what it's meant to be, an interior practice, to change the one who is praying, to change ourselves, which will always happen if we stand calmly before this uncanny and utterly safe presence, allowing the divine gaze to invade and heal our unconscious. The place where 95% of our motivations and reactions come from, all we can really do is return the gaze. As God gazes upon us, so we gaze upon God and return that. And then, as Meister Eckhart says, the eye which we look back at God with will be the same eye that first looked upon us. We complete the circuit. So as we practice this constant prayer, this silent prayer today, may that practice carry you outside of this place and carry you through the week, that you may constantly be gazing upon the world with the eyes that gazes upon us. Amen.